We're going to reconvene, and I'm very impressed the panel is already before us. Very good. So we're now on item 5.3, District Financial Health Monitoring.
Great. Good afternoon, President Epstein, Vice President Haynes, members of the board, Chancellor Oakley. I'm joined here today with Rena Finch and Jim Austin. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Frances Parmalee, Assistant Vice Chancellor of College Finance and Facility Planning. I'll let my panel kind of describe their role in regards to monitoring.
Good morning. I'm Rena Finch, Director of Fiscal Standards and Accountability, and our unit is charged with overseeing the monitoring of the fiscal condition of the districts.
Hi, I'm Jim Austin, and I am your fiscal monitor in the Peralta District. I'm also the advisor to the Chancellor on the Student-Centered Funding Formula, which is actually related to, naturally, Fiscal Oversight, and I was formerly with both FICMAT and ACCJC doing their annual fiscal reports. Thank you.
We bring upon this item to you just as a continuation of our previous conversations on fiscal monitoring districts. Today we want to explain to you the why we have to monitor our districts, how we're doing that, and also our long-term plan, which includes our proposed strategies. Just as a reminder, current law states that it's the intent of the legislature to encourage sound fiscal management practices amongst our districts. Having strong fiscal accountability provides assurance that the public funds for the education of our students are being used in the most efficient and effective manner. So this law also requires that our board to adopt criteria and standards for the assessment of fiscal conditions of our districts. Specifically, the board is required to develop a process to assess district financial conditions, to develop standards for sound fiscal management, to develop audit procedures, and to review those annual audit reports on an annual basis, to develop procedures and actions for districts that fail to achieve fiscal stability or that comply with the board's recommendations. And lastly, we report to the legislature and governor on the fiscal health of our districts. So in order for the Board of Governors to meet their statutory requirement, districts are required to submit annual budget and financial data, quarterly financial statement updates, and annual audit reports to our Chancellor's office. Title V also encourages each district to promote an environment for growth, productivity, and progress, and describes 12 principles that serves as a foundation for sound fiscal management in our community colleges. Sound fiscal management is a long-standing requirement for accreditation, as many of you know. We fast forward 10 years later and the appointment of Chancellor Oakley in 2016, and the adoption of the vision in 2017. Probably more than 10 years, so I apologize. That was a joke to just see if you guys were paying attention. The legislature and the administration signal strong support for these efforts by providing targeted funding and resources. Beginning in 14-15, the legislature provided funds to support the improvements in institutional effectiveness. Last year, they appropriated $27.5 million for the institutional effectiveness programs to provide technical assistance and improve district operations. In addition, we received $570,000 that's continuously appropriated to provide funds for technical assistance, reviews, and audits provided by our friends at FICMAT, the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team. And lastly, last year we were provided authority for a new fiscal health monitoring specialist in Rena's unit. This position will allow us to we receive additional capacity to develop greater understanding of the fiscal pressures faced by the system and expand our technical assistance offering. So as our office works to create a more robust fiscal monitoring system, our division is guided by these three principles that you see here that help us define the components of a good fiscal health. The first one is governance, and you may have heard this before. It's the phrase that we hear a lot called tone at the top, and it basically describes the governance and the management style of an organization. It refers to the commitment and ethical values of the Board of Trustees, as well as its executive management. Good governance is also exemplified by the 12 principles that are delineated in Title V. FCMAT also has created a fiscal health risk analysis tool developed for colleges that poses several questions to them in relation to governance to determine if district governance has clear budget development processes and adoption of a balanced budget, whether they adopted or adhered to policies of internal control and fraud prevention, that they identify resources to cover cost increases prior to settling collective bargaining agreements, that they have established plans to fund pensions and OPEB, and also to determine whether or not they have stable leadership. The next one I'm going to bring to your attention is the prudent fiscal practices, and those are to ensure that districts align their expenditures with revenue and consider both present and future needs. Again, the FCMAT Fiscal Health Risk Analysis tool is developed for community colleges to think about their reserves, that there at least 5% is maintained, that there's reasonable estimates developed, including enrollment projections, which is used for budget development and multi-year projections, that cash balances are reconciled and positive cash flow is maintained, and that the sufficient capital outlay and bond funds are available for its facilities. Lastly, the last circle you see there is accountability, and districts are held accountable for financial management at various levels, the local level and both at ACCJC and also the Chancellor's Office. The Chancellor's Office process is going to be described in the next following slides.
A matrix analysis was presented to the board in May of 2019 and has also been shared with the Consultation Council, with ACBO, and the Community College Internal Auditors Group. Based on feedback from this board, and we'd especially like to thank Amy Costa for her comments and suggestions, also from Consultation Council and ACBO's Fiscal Standards and Accountability Committee, we have added additional factors and a trend analysis to the overall assessment of district fiscal risk. This matrix analysis provides us with a starting point to identify which districts we will reach out to first. Districts with lower reserves and greater deficits are contacted to gather further information and develop a technical assistance plan if needed. The data source for the chart on the presentation and also the handout that was provided to you is from the 2018-19 final financial data submitted through our annual budget and financial report. Monitoring really it occurs on an ongoing basis. It's not just a one-time assessment. And it revolves around 5 core reports that are submitted by districts to the Chancellor's Office. The annual budget and financial that we just discussed, also quarterly financial status updates, and also the annual audit report. Additional information is considered as it is received, including district requests for assistance, whistleblower complaints, media reports, and late or missing compliance reports. So this ongoing process also includes weekly status updates that we provide to Chancellor's Office executive staff and to Chancellor Oakley so that timely information is available. For the financial reports we receive, the matrix analysis described in the prior slide is prepared and we reach out to districts accordingly. The quarterly financial status updates, in addition to the financial factors, will also include some information such as costs of recently settled labor contracts and significant fiscal events, such as a bond issuance or early retirement incentive programs. The annual audit reports are reviewed for audit opinions on financial statements and state and federal compliance. We also look at timeliness of submission of the audit report, significant deficiencies and material weaknesses in internal controls, repeat findings, and findings with an impact on funding levels. Districts are ranked by the overall number of audit concerns, and they may be contacted for additional information if they weren't already identified through review of the annual and quarterly financial reports. In addition, districts with repeat audit findings are requested to submit a corrective action plan, which is monitored until the issue or issues is resolved. So the College Finance and Facilities Planning Division continues to evaluate our monitoring process and make improvements. to recap, over the last year, we've developed a matrix analysis that measures unrestricted reserve balances and spending ratios. We've incorporated analysis of financial trends and other factors, increased scrutiny and follow-up on late submissions of financial and compliance reports, and we've requested and evaluated corrective action plans for repeat audit findings. Currently, we've got some minor revisions underway to our quarterly financial status update to collect a little more data on executive turnover and also results of recent contract negotiations. And staff is developing additional recommendations to provide resources and training to districts. We have some planned improvements. We would like to increase our collaboration with the Institutional Effectiveness Division to fund and coordinate trainings and workshops. We would increase our collaboration also with the League to provide timely and relevant information to district's Board of Trustees. Increase our collaboration with FCMAT to gain an understanding of their fiscal health risk analysis review process. We're also looking at making some minor revisions to our annual budget and financial report to include certification of compliance with the principles of sound fiscal management, and also to upgrade all of our data collection and our applications to make data entry and submission easier for users. The last item that I'm really excited about that we were planning is we're trying to develop an increased transparency of our fiscal reporting. We're calling it the Fiscal and Compliance Transparency or FACT portal that would provide a user-friendly, interactive dashboard of financial and compliance data that is more readily available. So there's several options for technical assistance that range from having the district submit a plan to us informally, all the way up to the appointment of a special trustee. And I want to talk about the results to date. So over this last year, we've had 2 FCMAT reviews that were completed and 1 that's in progress. The FCMAT engagement with Peralta resulted in the appointment of Jim as the fiscal monitor for Peralta at this time. And we had 7 corrective action plans for repeat audit findings that were received in our office. Those repeat findings related to findings about information systems controls, accounting and financial reporting, compliance with the 50% law, and attendance accounting. And with that very quick update, we'd like to open it up to questions and feedback. Oh, sorry, actually there's one last item on the hold harmless. We've identified as of the second principal apportionment cycle that 26 of the districts were in hold harmless under the student-centered funding formula. And I think Jim was going to talk a little bit about that.
Well,
They give you the easy stuff, huh?
I'm just the pretty face up here. That didn't come over very well, did it? Sorry, ladies. We are looking at why the hold harmless districts are hold harmless, and also trying to model moving forward which ones are perhaps a victim of their own demographics more than perhaps their operations. Anyhow, so we're really looking at those 26 districts. We have a couple analysis underway, and we will be reporting back to the Board of Governors on that. We're also learning a lot, I think, from the Peralta experiences, helping us to consider how we move forward with our metrics and our methods of analyzing districts that appear to be challenged fiscally. Thank you.
Thanks, Chancellor Oakley.
Yes, just really quick to wrap up before we take questions from the Board of Governors. I think the fiscal health monitoring of our colleges is something that we are taking very seriously. I think there's an old saying in our profession as higher education administrators that no presidents rarely get fired for bad curriculum, but they certainly get fired for a bad budget. And that just speaks to the fact that nothing creates more chaos in a district than poor fiscal health. It's very difficult to maintain the governance structures when a district is in poor fiscal health. It's very difficult for colleges to focus on the needs of students when there is poor fiscal health. So this is an area that we're going to be paying a lot of attention to. We're asking for more resources from the legislature and the governor to help us pay closer attention to. We're going to be working closely with the various groups, constituent groups in the system, and working very closely with the league, because a lot of this stems from not only governance structures, certainly governance structures, and I know that our colleagues at the Statewide Academic Senate routinely work with the league to pay visits to districts. A lot of these things are connected, governance and fiscal health. And also, the final thing I'll say is, while it is not our purview to get into the business of labor relations is clearly a big part of this, and how districts face negotiations, how labor bargaining units work with the administration and the board is critical to the fiscal health. So all parties need to be willing to come to the table and work through this, because this will have a significant impact on the ability of students to learn at these colleges. So I just ask all of our constituent groups, so both labor, administrators, academic senates, to work together to help maintain the fiscal health of our colleges. I'll end with that.
Member Costa.
You guys know I love this subject. It's fascinating. I agree with everything that our chancellor said. I mean, I think as a board member, my view of one of my primary responsibilities is fiduciary responsibility. And I think, as a board, part of that is overseeing the finances of the districts to make sure they're in good stead, because ultimately it impacts our faculty and our students when things get off course. I am interested in this issue of governance, because I think what you've presented is a really good presentation about a multi-dimensional way to look at district finances and to hopefully get, early warning signs before things really get out of control and districts are faced with really untenable decisions. This is a people-focused business, so ultimately, of course, it's going to impact people on these budgetary decisions. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the training and some of the governance, because numbers are numbers, and you can fix the numbers, but if the governance structure isn't in place to maintain those internal controls and those decision-making points, you'll ultimately just revert right back to where you started. And I think, the statewide policy around governance has probably not been as strong as the financial. So can you talk a little bit about some of the training and things that you're looking at, maybe in partnership with the league?
Before they start with the training, two things. With ACCJC, FICMAT, and now the board, I've been involved, I can't tell you how many districts looking at their fiscal situations. Governance is almost always a factor you have to look at. Second thing is I have to apologize, speaking of fiscal monitoring, I have to catch a train to Peralta now. So I apologize, you're in very capable hands, thank you very much.
Good excuse, Jim.
To answer your question about training, it's very much in the early development stages. So we've identified the need. We have a very good sense of what the components would be. We take our cues from the COSO principles of internal control framework, and also from what's called the Green Book. It's the Government Accountability Office. It's their standards for internal controls, and they have a quite extensive section just on governance and the tone at the top type of activities that Francis described earlier. We're excited that Lizette Navarrete will be coming on board as our new Vice Chancellor, and I think that'll really inform how we partner with the League. I'm sure she's going to bring in a lot of great ideas and great experience for that, so stay tuned on that.
Member Pergo.
I want to piggyback on that and say that I think one thing in the governance, and as we're thinking about, and maybe the League and ASCCC and others that may come into play roles in this, is for people to really understand what their lane is, in the governance structure. So one thing that I always recommend for faculty is that ASCCC has a lot of great primers on various aspects of governance and faculty role in those things. But I remember walking into my role as Academic Senate President, it was I didn't really know what my role was in budgeting and in those councils that I was now a part of. And so I turned to those and, really learned that I don't, it's not my role as a faculty member to say put $5 here and $100 there, but more that I get to engage in the process by which we formulate how things will be allocated. And one thing that I know in talking to my colleagues is one thing that I feel governance is very weak at is FTE allocation. It's just this kind of nebulous, magical thing that happens where you get money and then somehow there's a process by which we decide who's going to get what, and it very rarely involves anybody other than administrators or boards. And so I think that it's important to understand that when you look at even some of the biggest fiscal areas that we have, like FTE, that everybody should be weighing in on how those are allocated, and there should be structures in place. So as you're working on this, I would really encourage training in the areas of people understanding their roles, everybody understanding who should be at the table, what their roles are at that table. I often see faculty overstep their roles and then get angry when they don't get appeased, and then administrators wanting to shut them out as a result of that. And I know where these go awry, so I'm just really saying I think I would strongly encourage, as you unpack this, to think about that sort of training in your lane. What's your lane and what's your role in this? And I think that would be helpful for people.
Thank you.
I just have one question. You alluded to the fact that you think you need more resources. What additional resources do you feel you need, and what would they be used for?
Well, it'd always be wonderful to have many more positions, and that's certainly something we continue to ask for through the BCP process.
Currently, for the last couple of years, I think Rena has been our sole fiscal monitor. We have been getting additional resources, like having folks like Jim come on board that can provide us his perspective and his knowledge as we take on this more robust role in the area of fiscal monitoring. But definitely resources. We understand now that we can also partner with our institutional effectiveness division. So those are just things too that we are just kind of thinking outside of the box. So, and again too, also working with our constituents, and just we have various stakeholders that we work with, but also expanding those stakeholders. Currently, we have Fiscal Affairs group that used to be primarily just CBOs, but now that has been expanded. So that kind of opened our eyes as we're in this role, that there are other folks that we need to have a conversation with as we continue to mature our process going forward. I don't know if I answered your question, but more money and more people.
Yeah,
is always
I got that. But
normally, that's what you wanted to hear.
I'm trying to get more specific about exactly what you need, because we obviously are seeing more issues evolve here, and what exactly? I mean, what do you think is the minimum you need in order to be certain that you're developing an early warning system about this and offering the guidance that the colleges need?
So, just to give you a kind of the changes we've made just internally within the Chancellor's office, I think we've improved our communication as far as having an early warning system. On a weekly basis, we provide a report to our executive team that's fed in by various partners. So if there's information that's out there that we may not have been easily have access to before. Now we're able to have this two-way conversation with executive. And so I think over the last 6-7 months, that has definitely have increased as far as our knowledge of what's going on at our districts. Kind of just like what Rena alluded to, we just recently just connected with Lizette just last month because we brought up this whole issue at Consultation Council. And so she's had some great ideas of how do we now connect with our CEOs and our Board of Trustees and have them be part of this effort of ensuring that we have healthy districts out there. So I don't know if I can answer your question specifically, but Lizette and I are starting to have that conversation, and we'll continue to have that with the stakeholders that we work with.
If I can just add, I think, and this is true for every division, the challenge we have is you see multiple issues come up that need attention. we're just highlighting one area of fiscal monitoring. We have the student-centered funding formula. We have the facilities issues. We have a number of issues, and we have one division with limited staffing trying to do all of that. So it is literally a function of man hours, woman hours, people hours to apply to these issues. And so while we have very talented staff, they are literally spending fractions of the time necessary on any one issue. So that ultimately is the challenge, and this is true across every division, because we do want to provide more support to the field, but there is a lot of demand on the time of particularly the facilities division. So we're hoping to figure out how we can leverage Prop 98 dollars more to give us more capacity, but that's always the challenge.
Thank you. Member Baum.
I want to commend the Chancellor's leadership in bringing this to the table and also developing a format that we are monitoring system-wide the fiscal health of the system, because too often in the past it's come up anecdotally when something kind of blows up in our face. And for example, when San Francisco kind of knocked the entire system for a loop, at least the Chancellor's office, and diverted so much of our attention when we were trying to make progress in other areas. And then now to see not just Lassen or one or the others, but when I see Glendale and other districts that have significant deficits, San Diego, San Francisco, and San Francisco seem to be back in the same boat. Sonoma even running a deficit is of great concern. So I'm grateful for the Chancellor's leadership and for the team in place that will keep us apprised, because that we should be doing this regularly. The one thing that bothers me is that when I've talked to some local districts, they seem to think that their hands are tied by some of the decisions and long-term debt obligations and things like that, that they almost are at a point of inaction. They're just waiting for Sacramento to solve it. And how do we change that mindset? That it's when I talk to local trustees, they just say, well, everybody's in the same boat, and this is not just college districts; it's also city governments and others. How are we going to get around some of that mindset that we'll just continue to spend until it gets so bad that Sacramento's going to have to do something about it?
Okay, we have a public comment. You certainly may.
So I too am a trustee, and I have a few questions. One, the survey that goes out, that series of questions that goes out is voluntary, as I understand it, that can be answered. To what extent have, based on numbers, districts on their own filled it out and sent it in terms of the...
I think you're talking about the FCMAT, Fiscal
The
Health
FCMAT,
Risk Analysis
yes.
tool. So currently, we're not requiring districts to
Exactly.
share that with us. And I've heard anecdotally quite a number of districts using it. Basically, they submit it along with their annual budget plan for approval to their board. Those districts tend not to be the ones that we hear from or that we need to reach back out to and contact. So that's something we'd like to develop more, is the use of that tool as a good communication tool, both at the local level and with the Chancellor's office. But without actually, requiring them to do it, we're exploring ways that we can encourage that more.
So I would, as someone, many of my colleagues on boards of trustees don't come with the knowledge of fiscal oversight. And so it actually takes the financial folks to, break down that information and be very honest about it. So there's that component. And so where I absolutely agree that as governance bodies, we need to be asking the right questions at the right time and really seeking out the correct answers. And so I'm going to put Larry Galizio on the hot seat relative, I know he wants to speak on this issue, what the league is doing as the consummate sort of overall statewide association that works with both CEOs as well as with trustees, because I think it's important. And then I want to leave you with, we do need to figure out, I looked at my district, and it seems to be doing really well, but there are a whole series of areas of questions that get asked, and so I suspect that it looks like you could be doing well in that column of expenditures and unrestricted reserves, that there may be some other areas in the structure and in the organization that one could do better. So from the standpoint of the chancellor's office, I think we need to figure out to sort of together how we encourage, and I'll put truly encourage all of our districts to really, I don't want to say take it seriously, but really be encouraged and supported in really looking internally at our organizations. So Larry Galizio.
Larry Glazer from the League, and thank you for bringing up this topic. I think number one, to the extent the Board of Governors and the Chancellor's Office has a similar message to the League, I think the more overlap, the better. The notion of, well, I'm from Sacramento, I'm here to help you, is not a great message for local districts, having been a local board member. But as the membership organization, right, and every single district is a voluntary member of the League and they pay annual dues, I think there's a level of trust that exists. So I think collaboration is really important, and we want to continue that. Effective governance is a necessary, although insufficient, condition for fiscal sustainability and success as a district and a college. You could have 20 years going back where there's been mismanagement or bad decisions or bad bargaining decisions, and then you could have an excellent board today or for the last couple of years, and to dig out of that hole with all of those outstanding obligations that's many of our districts, Chancellor knows that very well. I mean, many of our districts are in that condition. That doesn't say that governance is not critical, it's vital, and the fiduciary responsibility is really important, but I think we have some good districts, strong governance, strong CEOs where they have legacy issues, but we have the panoply of problems. We have an effective trusteeship program. If those of you who come to our January conference, there will be probably 70, 80 trustees who are doing all day long fiscal, Brown Act, fiscal responsibility. We have board chair workshops. We have ongoing professional development. We have effective trusteeship program. Those that are the kinds of trustees that you want are more apt to attend the professional development. And we do what we can to encourage everybody. So again, to the extent this body, the Chancellor's Office, and all of us can be encouraging everybody to participate in this kind of work, I think that will really go quite a long way. And one of the things that also makes it difficult, quite frankly, and it's not a comfortable topic, is so we have about 444 trustees locally elected, and they run in campaigns. And depending upon who finances their campaigns, we can do as much training and education as we want, but if that trustee perceives that they have one special interest focus as opposed to, we are a board, we are only powerful and as a board, or we only have power as a board of the whole, if you have somebody who wants to satisfy a particular constituency, that is a challenge. And if you have a 5 or 7 member board, if it takes 1 or 2 people to create a lot of challenges. So just, I don't want to be negative about it, but it's a great challenge. I think it's an important topic, and look forward to working with all of you in the Chancellor's office.
Thank you for that civics lesson. I guess that's the end. That's it for this item. Okay. Moving on to number 5.4, the Palomar Community College District.
All right, as we get the presentation set up, I want to welcome the leadership of the Palomar Community College District. As you recall, we've had discussions about the situation that's transpiring at Palomar and the FICMAT report. So I really appreciate the Palomar leadership taking the time to come up here and speak to the Board of Governors. And with that, I will let Associate Vice Chancellor Parmalee introduce the item.
Okay, thank you. So just building off of our last presentation, they come today at the request of the Chancellor, and also as one of the principles of sound fiscal management is to inform our board on the financial conditions of our districts to ensure that the board, our students, and our staff are well informed. So I'm going to start off by introducing Board President Nancy Hench, and also Acting President Superintendent Dr. Jack Kahn. Michelle Giacomoni is sitting in the audience. She's with our FICMAT team. She's the Deputy Executive Officer, and we are going to do a quick switch of seating. And so she's going to start off with her presentation of the summary of the report, and then shortly after, our Palomar representatives will discuss their implementation plan.
Good morning. I feel like I was just in front of you, but in Riverside, right? I know it's the same cover, different. So thank you for having me here this morning.
We like you, but we'd like to see you less often.
I would like to see you less often as well. So remember that this is the hardest part of my job, because not every day of mine is like this. So the first thing I do want to talk about, I want to make something clear, that Palomar College asked us to come. So this is a real difference. And although I'm going to seem not nice at times and negative through the presentation, and these two have heard it before, Palomar invited us in. And I think that's very brave, very, very brave. So there were signs of trouble, and they asked us to come. And so I appreciate the Chancellor's office and the board taking it so serious now, and the district as well, as far as what the results are. But they knew they had a problem, and they wanted somebody independent and external to come in. That's very brave. So I just want to say that, because it's very hard then, because they know when FICMAT comes in, they're not going to tell them everything that they're doing correctly. Absolutely not. We're just going to tell them what they need to correct. And so I just thought that was really brave. So we were actually asked by Palomar to come in August. And so we ended up going in with a team. We were there doing our field work, and we had a report in November. We presented it to their board in November. The district was really good about supplying what we needed. And actually, when we went into the field, although there was a different end result of this review than I thought there was going to be, and I'll explain that in a second. They were very, very approachable, gave us what we needed, were honest when they didn't have it, and that's a really positive thing. The end result is different than I expected, and I told them that at their board meeting. I did not see them as a high risk. I did not see them, I thought there was over-exaggeration. I really did. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. And, based on the documentation, what I was seeing, the few conversations we had before we went in, I really didn't see them as a high risk, but they are. They are a high risk. And when I was here before you a few months ago with a different district, although their risk score was higher, right? This risk score is 44.5%. I will tell you, this one almost worries me more. The numbers are what the numbers are. So to me, once it's high risk, it's high risk. This one almost worries me more because Peralta wasn't running out of money as quickly as this one is. The rated deficit spending, the amount of general fund unrestricted used on salary and benefits in Palomar is much higher. So there's less places to go to fix this problem. That worries me as a FICMAN employee just doing this for a really, really long time. But anyway, the district score was a 44.5%, which does indicate that the district is at a high probability of fiscal insolvency. And so we'll talk about some of those key indicators of why that is so worrisome for Palomar. But basically, as you'll see in the last sentence there, in 2 years, the district will have consumed all reserves. Because remember, if you look at the report, they are borrowing from their OPEB account. So that actually, in the current year, is what's keeping them at a 9% reserve. If we take that out, they're at a 5-point-something% reserve. So, and then next year, it just progressively gets worse. They would be forced to borrow $6.5 million to stay from an external source to stay solvent in the next 2 years if something doesn't change. That's very dire. That's the part that worries me about Palomar. Not that it's insurmountable, but the clock is really ticking on this one. So as we talked before, the Fiscal Health Risk Analysis is an independent tool. As you heard in the last presentation, and the timing couldn't be better for the two presentations. It is a tool. It can be a self-assessment tool. I think it's harder for us to be honest when we answer the questions ourselves, or our perception, if we're doing it ourselves, maybe a little more positive than mine might be. But it's a great self-assessment tool, at least to get governing boards, administration, and the constituents talking about what are the triggers of poor fiscal health. I really think it's a great tool for that, at least to get the conversation going. I doubt very much if the Palomar board had ever thought about a tool like this and really asking questions in these 18 different areas. So I know just watching their reactions from, I went to 2 board meetings to kind of introduce what the study was going to be about. And then after the results, I could tell that their attention and focus was on many more areas than it was before. And so it is a good tool, I think, for districts to use on their own to start that conversation. And but they need to be honest about the score. So for Palomar, same 18 areas. There's high risk and low risk. It's a weighted average tool. Of these 18 areas, I just want you to know that there are 5 of the 18 that truly are above a 50% no rate. And so those are the ones I like to concentrate on. I mean, the whole information is in the report, but the district received all no's, which are bad, in 3 areas, which are deficit spending. They are definitely deficit spending, and they don't have a plan. And that is the scary part. They're in conversations, and I know that when they talk about it, they will talk about that they have a plan and they are having conversations, but now it needs to happen. So deficit spending was all no's. That's scary. Enrollment and attendance. The district actually had started putting some things in place, but we weren't able to score them yes on some of them because there wasn't any time to really judge that. But the enrollment and attendance, they don't have an enrollment management plan. There's so much work to do there because, as you know, then that carries all the way through to revenues and student success. And then multi-year projections were also all no's. Although you didn't just ask me, but in your earlier conversation, one of the questions is what is something that we could do for colleges that might help with their fiscal solvency? Multi-year projections are so important, and they're not required in the community college world. That's scary to me because the impact of every decision we make today, we need to understand what the impact is in the future years. And unless an entity is doing a solid multi-year projection, and they're hard. I mean, the way our funding models and everything change year after year, and the amount that we're funded at, it's hard. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's an easy task, and you'll hear a lot of arguments why it's not possible. I do not agree. They are possible. They're hard in K-12 as well, and they're required. So multi-year projections are a really important thing, and in this case, for Palomar, they received no's in all of that areas. Again, they don't have a plan. Decisions are being made. There's things not just in the contract, but other decisions being made, because this isn't all about people. But again, people are the biggest part of where the money's going, so we have to talk about people, that they're really at risk. The other areas that were more than 50% no's were budget development and adoption, a real issue with how we're adopting budgets, the information that's going into it. I think there are conversations with groups, but then not the knowledge really going out. They have a very impressive budget book. It's actually quite amazing, but it doesn't really pull out unrestricted revenues or have the detail that's needed to understand their budget. The other that they got 5 out of 6 no's is on fund balance, because again, if you pull out that transfer from the OPEB account, their fund balance percentage goes way down. Now remember, we all recommend, although we know 5% isn't enough of a reserve, but we recommend a 5% reserve. The district itself has a 7% reserve policy. So they have even a higher standard, which is good. I mean, we always would recommend that, but they're definitely not going to be able to even meet that standard in future years without this transfer, and this transfer shouldn't have to happen. So steps definitely have to be taken. Outside intervention could be necessary, and we do recommend that they continue to work on these areas. They have so many things to work on right now, but again, because we are talking about a fiscal clock and such deficit spending, that a lot of attention has to be made. And because we're talking about people and that part of the budget, there are also a lot of deadlines in place that have to be looked at. So the reality is the district can't solve its fiscal distress through just enrollment growth anymore. Cuts are going to have to be made at Palomar College, period. It's without question. And so where that happens is up to the board and administration and the many groups that feed up into that, but they are going to be hard decisions. And at the end, it is the board's decision. And so that is going to have to happen. They're going to have to look at everything. Also, the operational policies and procedures that are being used at Palomar College are very outdated. They are a fiscally independent district, and not all community colleges are. The internal control weaknesses and lack of policies was surprising for a fiscally independent district. Not suggesting that anything inappropriate is going on, but boy, could it. And so that's really an area that has to be looked at. Again, this didn't happen overnight. None of this ever happens overnight. It happens slowly. We have higher reserves, or we have people in the business office that budget a certain way. I mean, it's not always evident to governing boards or administration that don't understand budgets what's really happening, right? I mean, sometimes we're our own worst enemies as budget managers because we just kind of fix the problem. But through that, our board doesn't really see that the decisions that they are ultimately making, how it's impacting the future. So it is a long history of decisions that have been made, but the reality now, there's not as much time to fix that. The thing is, in Palomar, it's going to take everybody to work together. And I've sat through a lot of board meetings and sat through a lot of personalities of districts. This is a tough one. There's a lot of personal stuff. There's a lot of anger at board meetings. And so I just have to tell you, this board and Jack, as the acting president, have a really tough time ahead of them, but they're going to have to do the right thing so that they stay solvent. So we have a number of recommendations. The top is, the first one is that they need to immediately begin bargaining with all of their groups and looking at all aspects of contracts. Not saying that contracts are the problem, and I never want to give that impression, but that's where the money is. And so reality, are there contract provisions that just don't make sense but have been there forever but are costing the district a lot of money? But also, are there contract provisions that aren't even really being followed or aren't being followed? I mean, there's a lot that can be looked at in addition to when we start talking about benefit plans and COLA and everything else as far as the conversations that are going on. Also have very strong recommendation about establishing an internal audit capacity position. There is a position, so I don't want to suggest that there isn't, but it currently reports to the director of the department. Does it report to the president or even the CBO of the, does now, perfect. See, I love when things happen. It just was a big internal control issue of what was going on. And basically, with the rest of the recommendations, they need to look at the management structure. They need to plan more globally. They need an enrollment management plan. Need to really look at data and understand where the elements are coming from and how that is driving revenue in their district. Although there isn't a lot of opportunity to increase revenue a lot, they need to make sure that they are accounting for things correctly and getting what they need. The district really doesn't have a position control system, also a very scary factor for anyone worried about internal controls and are positions being approved correctly, and then are they budgeted correctly? So position control needs to happen better. Right now, it's just a human resources function, and not saying that they're not doing it is the best that they can, but it really needs to be a three-legged stool with budget, HR, and the board also involved, making sure that positions are actually approved. And then last but not least is the old training recommendation. This district needs training. I will tell you, most districts need training across the state, just to echo the last item on your agenda. That's whether it's the board or the staff or even members of the community, but really we'll start with board and staff. There is a lot of training that's necessary because it's a bigger job than most of us realize, especially with board members. And I think a lot of the staff at Palomar have been there for a while, and so just do things the way that they do. Okay, that's mine. Now we're going to try to get to yours, which, thank you.
Morning. I have a prepared statement that I'd like to share with the board before turning it over to our acting superintendent president. It's good afternoon now, I believe. Good afternoon, President Epstein, Board of Governors, and Chancellor Oakley. My name is Nancy Ann Hench, and I am the Palomar Community College current governing board president. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today to discuss the status and response to the Fiscal Health Risk Analysis Report of the Palomar Community College District. On behalf of the district, I'd like to thank the FCMAT study team, led by Michelle Giacomini, for their dedication and time in visiting the district, and for their willingness to be candid and, in result, assist our district in its fiscal recovery. The district extended an invitation to the Fiscal Crisis Management Team, FCMAT, in August of 2019 in order to have an independent evaluation of our fiscal management practices and performances as one facet of a recent institutional effectiveness partnership initiative. Having done so, we received notable support and approbation for proactively seeking assistance in evaluating not only our fiscal processes and practices, but also the many facets of our operations that impact both short-term and long-term fiscal health. While it has taken consistent, thoughtful, and ongoing communication with all constituent groups, including that with my fellow trustees, I can assure you that the Palomar Community College District is committed to making the important and strategic decisions necessary to embark on a long-term fiscal stewardship plan. To set the groundwork for this plan, we began to hold budget workshops in early September. The workshops were held at the main campus in San Marcos and via Zoom to allow for as much participation as possible from all areas of our district. The initial workshops informed constituency groups of the projected budget deficit, which initiated a solicitation of cost-saving ideas from all employees. In total, 12 budget workshops were held in just 3 short months. In result, over 6 pages of cost-saving suggestions were received, and while many of the suggestions were duplicated, the district did gain insight into where cost-saving measures could be implemented immediately, and others that will require dedicated collaborative bargaining sessions or campus-wide discussions to achieve. I am pleased to let you know that our administrators have worked diligently to develop the tactics and milestones of the plan, and in fact have already completed some levels of response to the Fiscal Health Risk Analysis report that we received 2 months ago. Before I turn the remainder of the presentation over to Acting Superintendent Dr. Jack Kahn, I would like to assure you all that the Palomar Community College District Board of Trustees is confident that we will be able to rectify the current leadership vacancies within our district. On behalf of the Palomar Community College Board of Trustees, I extend our gratitude for your support and guidance as we move through our fiscal recovery and set a foundation of fiscal health for our district. At this time, I would like to ask Dr. Jack Kahn to take you through our initial response to the Fiscal Health Risk Analysis report. Thank you.
Good afternoon. President Epstein, Board of Governors, and Chancellor Oakley. I appreciate this opportunity to provide you with an overview of how the Palomar College District is working through all 8 recommendations within the Fiscal Health Risk Analysis report as provided to us by the FCMAT team. Like Board President Hench, I am thankful for the professional and respectful approach that was used by FCMAT to help us identify the obstacles to our fiscal health and provide us with recommendations. In reviewing the report, I can assure you that we have been forthright in our discussions with our campus community. We've been clear with all of our constituent groups that we have a dire need to make difficult and meaningful decisions to address our short and long-term fiscal health. I think it's important to also state that while negotiations of collective bargaining agreements have started, the resulting impact will likely begin in July of 2020. All parties are committed to keeping with our mission and the vision for success as discussions are held and decisions are agreed upon. We also remain diligent and focused on immediately implementing cost-saving measures to reduce the deficit projected for this fiscal year. We know we can do better, and we're committed to doing so. I can assure you that our approach in addressing solutions is one that can be deemed strategic and collaborative in nature. So I'm going to go through the specific recommendations and where we are, and then we'll take questions. So generally speaking, our presentation this afternoon focuses on 4 areas: our overall implementation approach, standards that we're using for all of the initiatives, resources and support that we will need to move forward, and of course the discussion of the recommendations. We've utilized the recommendations of the FCMAT report and the Fiscal Health Risk Analysis checklist to develop a preliminary action plan that we're now fine-tuning. We've had an actionable timeline inclusive of milestones and leaders for each strategic initiative. We're committed to being accountable for these initiatives and are working to identify the resources available or that would be required to implement the plan. So first, the standards for all initiatives. After we received the FCMAT report, it became clear that as we go through the different recommendations that there's going to be particular standards we want to make sure that we apply to addressing each issue. So we're making certain, for example, to have continued detailed and actionable discussions with our constituent groups, inclusive of student leadership. Our action items will be regularly evaluated and reassessed and distributed in quarterly reports. In addition, we realize that many changes will require professional development training in order for measurable implementation, and we will work with our PD coordinator to help develop what is needed as we move forward. Lastly, we're committed to performing a fiscal health risk analysis on a regular basis to ensure improvements and modify plans accordingly. We'll also work with our Shared Governance Committee, our Strategic Planning Council, for next steps and prioritization of all sub-projects that will be necessary to complete all 8 recommendations. Okay. Recommendation 1, immediately begin bargaining with all constituent groups. Negotiations have already started with our Council of Classified Employees, and we expect to begin shortly with openers with our Palomar Faculty Federation. The district has identified multiple cost-saving initiatives to discuss in negotiation and has developed a timeline to complete all negotiations, which could significantly impact our expenditures starting in July of 2020. Now, while recommendation 1 pertains to negotiations specifically, we wanted the Board of Governors to know that we're implementing several immediate budget savings initiatives that do not require negotiations. In the past 2 months, we've implemented strategies such as a hiring freeze, reduction of hourly funding, and a cost-saving initiative that was developed in collaboration with our unions and the Faculty Senate. We will be able to address our deficit this year through temporary resources to mitigate our deficit. However, we also expect permanent reductions through negotiations as we move forward. We want you to know we're doing every single possible thing that we can on campus. Number 2, establish a comprehensive internal auditing capacity. A risk assessment has already been completed and comprehensive internal audit plan has been developed and is scheduled for board approval, both of which are aligned to comply with the contracted district audit manual. Depending on the scope of work that is identified in the audit, we're certain we'll need additional people and consultation to complete the work. Recommendation 3, review the management structure in all academic and non-academic areas. Vice presidents have reviewed the academic and non-academic organizational structure of the college. This includes areas where leadership staffing is lacking and better oversight is needed. This has provided a deep look at efficiencies and methods to reduce duplication of work to better align our staff with fiscal constraints. Our new Vice President for Human Resources is reviewing our current structure and creating a comprehensive plan this spring to move these ideas forward. Recommendation 4, update and follow a comprehensive district-wide planning process that drives budget development. We've made much progress this past year in our program reviews, which will lead to a more integrated approach to tying those program reviews to resource allocation and the district's strategic priorities. We're committed to making progress on our budget development process this cycle, and through leadership of our new interim Vice President of Finance and Administrative Services, who we hope will be approved by the board this evening, to lead that team on that project. In addition, through collaborating with IEPI, we currently have a dedicated work group that's working on a redesign of participatory governance structure to address student needs and resource allocation. So that's all happening now. Recommendation 5. To optimize offerings for students, establish and follow a college-wide comprehensive enrollment management plan. An enrollment management team is charged with establishing enrollment targets and approaches to achieve these targets in alignment with the student-centered funding formula. This team has already met and is focused on objectives for completion during the spring semester. To impact the next fiscal year and beyond, we will be better aligning our enrollment management plans and processes to the vision of success, resource allocation, our student-centered funding formula, and of course, all the work we're doing on guided pathways. Doing so will aid us in reaching fiscally appropriate FTS to FTF ratios, improving our knowledge of enrollment trends, and monitoring program needs. Recommendation 6, conduct a data integrity study to validate all data used for decision-making and to ensure it is accurate and understood consistently by all users. We're expanding our institutional data integrity team to conduct a comprehensive review, validation, and analysis of all of the internal data and reporting for the college as a whole. We believe that this initiative will facilitate more quantitative decision-making going forward and provide the information required to make cost-saving kinds of decisions. Thus far, we've built a student-centered funding formula model that allows the college to forecast revenue over 4 years based on strategic goals that will maximize the funding factors. We've also developed standard budget reports that will help inform decision-making and planning. Recommendation 7, integrate position control and enrollment management with the financial reporting systems in accordance with standards and best practices. We understand that we must establish a position control system that will interface with our financials, kind of the three-legged stool, as you mentioned earlier. An implementation team has evaluated requirements and identified a timeline for this work. Recently, we completed an upgrade to PeopleSoft, and we feel better positioned to move this forward as a district. We will need expertise to properly design and configure our systems, along with assistance to backfill positions with individuals qualified to implement systems improvements. And finally, recommendation 8, establish and follow a comprehensive training program for the following areas: budget, ed code, government responsibilities. Research is in progress to identify leaders in their fields who can provide the trainings necessary for our Board of Trustees and administrators, and the dates for these trainings have been scheduled. We've contacted the CCLC and ACA and other organizations to get recommendations of folks to perform this work. In summary, in the last 2 months, we have several items already completed as steps to complete the FCMAT recommendations in the report, including the creation of a comprehensive audit plan, engagement in several cost-saving measures, and cross-functional teams to begin the heavy lifting this spring. We're engaged in negotiations and have started work to assist in meeting the requirements of an enrollment management plan and commitment accounting procedure. Due to the deep infrastructure issues inherent in our systems and culture, this is a primary challenge for which we need immediate assistance in terms of things like negotiations and our overall infrastructure. I want to emphasize that we have really talented and committed people at Palomar College who are often stuck in silos without adequate time and resources to address noted challenges in the report, is similar to what one of our colleagues was discussing earlier. We are still evaluating the amount of funding and resources we would need to facilitate and implement those changes to our infrastructure. And I just want to emphasize also that Palomar Community College District for nearly 70 years has a legacy of excellence in educating over 35,000 students annually. We are better than this fiscal situation. We accept the FCMAT report, the recommendations, and want to be accountable to changing them, and will be accountable to changing them. We also recognize that we can't do this alone. We're committed to doing the work needed to ensure that Palomar is here to support our community and students now and into the future. On behalf of the Palomar Community College District, I again want to thank you for this opportunity. At this time, we would like to address any questions.
Thank you. So I have I think 3 questions here. I heard early on in your presentation that there was a shared governance committee on addressing the next 8 steps. What's the title of that committee?
That's our Strategic Planning Council, which is where we'll be taking kind of the next steps.
Strategic planning. Can you talk a little bit about the composition and how the people are chosen to serve in that?
It's a shared governance committee. It has representatives from all constituent groups, including students. What I would hope to do is we have a really strong associated student government and a lot of participation this year through our associated student government. We also have a really strong guided pathways team of about 6 or 7 students who are very involved. My hope would be to bring them to that team also, and that we have a student representative on each one of the recommendations so that we're getting student perspectives as we move forward.
Awesome, that's great to hear. So on recommendation 2, I served on my policy and procedures committee. I know how invaluable it is to have student input on reevaluating policy and procedures.
Absolutely.
Do you plan on involving students in that step, and can you speak a little bit to that?
We have had students on our policies and procedure committee, and as part of this recommendation, we do have to specifically update all the policies that relate to these different auditing processes that will change, and we will, and as I said, absolutely have student input on that as we go forward.
Perfect, awesome. And then my last question has to do on recommendation 3, talks a little about how the vice presidents, let's see here, talks a little bit about how the vice presidents are going to do a student-focused plan to address kind of all those aspects. Will it only be vice presidents who have input into that plan? Is there shared governance input in that?
Right now, that's kind of where it is, but yeah, it will have other input as we go forward. Yeah, just right now, it's sort of in a early draft kind of thinking phase, and we just brought on a new vice president for human resources that's going to take that work and then make recommendations, and then it will go to a broader group.
Perfect. Well, it sounds like you're involving students. I hope that continues. It's really essential, in these difficult times that we have student input.
We're very lucky we have a very active student body this year, which has been great.
Thank you very much and good luck.
Member Costa.
Shocker, I have a question. I want to just reiterate what Michelle said, which is I think the district, including the board, is really to be commended for bringing in FCMAT. I know that this is tough, and the choices ahead are difficult ones that you'll be faced with. I'm focused on recommendation 4 because what stood out, and Michelle certainly highlighted this in her presentation, is the pretty serious deficits in your budget process. I think, clearly decisions were being made that were not fully informed on key components like revenues, out-year liabilities, multi-year forecasting. So I think it's embedded in here, but can you tell me a little bit more about, what improvements you're making, not just to your budget process, but to the actual component pieces of your budget?
Sure. I mean, I can tell you what we've done so far and what I believe we should do, although we're sort of at the beginning of that and bringing in a new leadership in that area. So we did a total overhaul of our program review process in the last couple years, doing some standardization across instructional and non-instructional areas, but really building in a lot of the initiative kinds of things into our program reviews to make sure we're asking questions, for example, on the instructional side about program completions, about guided pathways, about work-based learning, about strong workforce, and so we really amplified the level of the program review to make sure that it was consistent with some of the changes that are here at from the chancellor's office, and then standardize those across the campus. So we have this review, I think, that's primed to be connected to our budget development process, but as it stands, everything in the FICMAT report as it identifies has been a problem. We've been a rollover budget district where we haven't done appropriate analyses, really on 2 levels. We haven't done we haven't connected the program review information to the planning, and we haven't done the appropriate kind of analyses across areas to make sure that areas that need funding are being funded and those that are not using funding are not. So we did make one giant progress last year with a lottery project where we have lottery funding that is embedded in some of the programs. And last year we worked with our budget office and that was the same kind of thing where it was being rolled over, but people weren't looking at, well, how is this money really being spent in Area A or not in Area B? And we have a lot of areas that were really high instructional material disciplines that had no lottery funding. So there was no logic to it, really. So we met with Fiscal last year, did a strong project with that, look at the lottery funding across the district, and did an analysis over the last 3 years. How's that funding been used? Where should it be, et cetera? And so as we were doing that, it was the kind of thing, this could be a model of how we look at general fund and how we look at how we're best using our categoricals, et cetera. So we have kind of a potential model to start with, but as we go through our budget development process this February and March, the folks in the fiscal area are, obviously as much as a function of this and also because they want to make the changes, really interested in moving this forward. So it's going to be, how do we connect our program review, so the program review gets looked at by a shared governance committee. Makes sense to me that would go through our budget development kind of a committee. There would be discussions about how the budget is developed. That goes forward, et cetera. Recommendations are made to the executive team, and then there's an analysis of those 3-year spending patterns, et cetera. So I think we have a model that we can look to, but that's just something that we're literally beginning right now.
I have a question also with respect to the state and the chancellor's office. How many of our state contracts are actually administered through Palomar? I know every year we approve multi-million, if not tens of millions of dollars of contracts that are for TTIP and others through Palomar. And then how much risk is to those projects that we have asked Palomar to be the fiscal agent?
Other than the TTIP, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I don't see that there's any risk to those particular projects at all. I meet regularly with the leadership of that, and it's a completely separate. That budget is completely separate. It's not something that I see would be a challenge. I really don't. I think it's a great question and an understandable question, but I don't see I don't see a concern there.
Because as a board, we will anticipate in May, we usually approve the renewal of that contract. And does that make sense to then make a vote of tens of millions of dollars to a contract that is having to a district that's in fiscal distress.
Perfectly reasonable. Question is perfectly reasonable. I don't think it would have a negative impact, but that makes perfect sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to praise the Board of Trustees for bringing in FICMAT and listening to the recommendations, because as a longtime trustee, as much as we look to the staff and the administrators to carry it out, it really starts with the trustees in setting the tone and the priorities and enforcing them, and then taking the heat for the difficult decisions, because I've been in those board meetings where stakeholder groups and public members come in and really take their frustration out on the Board of Trustees. But it's and I'm really counting on the board then to be very assertive in its leadership going forward, because the board is the organization that's invested with the power to make these very difficult decisions.
Member Salazar.
And this question is more to the chancellor and the chancellor's office. I'm just curious, in particularly for districts who find themselves in fiscal distress, how much malleability is there in terms of use of categorical funds, or how much flexibility can a district be given to weather the storm, and is that even available to districts, if that makes any sense, in terms of regulations or other things that they could be utilizing to help?
The categoricals are categoricals for a reason. They are not to be used to supplement or supplant the general fund. It is really up to the district to work within its general fund to fund the basic operations, the day-to-day operations of the college. At this point, we do not have the authority to allow them to use other funds to cover the deficit. I mean, certainly districts use and leverage their categoricals to support efforts, but not to supplant those efforts. So whether that be categoricals, whether that be funds for facilities, a bond measure, they have funds and reserves for their healthcare benefits. It's very dangerous once they start dipping into those funds to cover the cost of general operations.
I just wanted to add, there are actually requirements that when they do need, so if a district were to go insolvent, which really means running out of cash, right? Even if they were to borrow money from a categorical, they would have to be able to pay that back. So there are really strict rules with that. The state, before allowing an emergency appropriation, which I'm not suggesting is going to happen here, would want to make sure the district's truly utilizing all the cash it has first. But we didn't see any indication that they were dipping into categorical funds. The one fund they were doing a transfer from, dipping isn't a very nice word, sorry, doing a transfer from was the OPEB fund, but that was brought to the board for approval. So it's not like anybody was trying to hide that they were needing to do that to keep their reserve.
Member Hall?
Is your board acting as one and is in agreement with the steps that you've proposed here today, or is there any internal discord that's going to prevent you from implementing the steps that you want to take? That's first question. And then the second question is to the auditor. You had a somber tone for the state of things. Do you believe that the steps that are being proposed will prevent insolvency?
Thank you, Board Member Hall, for the question. I would like to assure you that I, in most recent weeks, have had in-depth conversations with my fellow trustees, and it's not a secret. We have had what some would consider to be a split board in the past. We've had several 3-2 votes over the last couple of years. What was nice to see is that we were able to come out of closed session with a unanimous vote to appoint our new acting superintendent president, Dr. Khan, and I have confidence that our board in the future is going to work very collaboratively to do what's in the best interest of those 30,000 students and to really take to heart that what we need to do at Palomar College is for the benefit of those students, and a way to serve those students is to act fairly and appropriately with all of our faculty, constituent groups, and the community at large. Thank you.
President Hench, I'm sorry, you
I
have
had the
more?
second question to the auditor.
Sorry. So is it enough to avert insolvency? I love their plan. If they can make this plan happen, it sounds to me like yes. But I have to say the proof is in the pudding, right? So I really feel that in many cases, the board and administration, many of them, I think there might have been discussions, but really didn't realize the degree of where they were at. And I can't go into the history of why that was, but I saw shock on their faces. So I believe from at least what I saw, and I like to believe I've become a pretty good judge of character, that they are standing behind this plan. Now, do they have the capacity to pull it off? That's going to be very tough. And I think that you need to ask that question in July after they adopt this budget. What kind of cuts are, what is next year's budget? But it sounds like a really, really good plan. And I feel that they mean it. So now we have to see if they can really do it. And if you don't see action in next year's budget, then you need to really, then you're really, the time is running down much quicker.
President Hench, you probably watched our previous agenda item where one of the issues that came up was trying to get an early warning system on issues like this. And you've been on this board for a while. And I was just wondering, when did you first become aware there might be some kind of problem? And how did you find out?
So thank you for the question, President Epstein. I have been on the board. I was elected first in 2012 and again in 2016, so I'm just finishing out a second term at the moment. We have known, and as our former superintendent of fiscal vice president of fiscal had shared with us that we had been deficit spending for the course of several years. We had a robust reserve, and then we as a board did ask to have that reserve increased from the recommended 5 to 7%. So we were made aware of it. We have had budget workshops where it has been discussed. I think that as newly elected by my board as board chair, with Dr. Blake, we did sit down and take a look at scheduling out all of those budget workshops for the upcoming year, and that was an item that was passed at our December 17 board meeting, so all of our trustees now have it in their calendar to be there and be present as we move forward. We do have budget workshops that we had previously. That was with conversations with either my superintendent, Dr. Blake, or with the previous vice president of fiscal as he was presenting to us. Having been on the board as long as I have, I realize how serious of an issue this is, and in the last couple of months, especially when we as a board asked the FitMat team to come and take a look at what was happening, it was, as Michelle has indicated, it was a shocker to the system at how serious, because you can have your numbers line up at the end of the month and borrow from here and do that, but to really take a look at all of the controls and have somebody take a look at our systems and processes as a board, I think I will speak for myself and not the entirety of the board. I was shocked at how things were running.
So you said, though, it was several years of deficit spending?
Mm-hmm. Not to this extent. And actually, Dr. Khan could probably speak more. He's been with, I'm not so good at remembering numbers on the spot. I'm happy to get those numbers to you, but I would hate to misspeak in front of this governing body. So,
no, I don't really want any number. I'm just trying to understand if you're on a governing board. I mean, we're on a board. We need to, pay attention to things, and you do have a certain trust in your staff, but I guess. it doesn't sound like that there's recognition on the board until just very recently that this was a crisis, despite the fact there was deficit spending for years. Is that what you're saying?
I would state, in my opinion, and speaking simply for myself and not for the members of the board collectively, that I was not aware of how serious this was. That is not how it was presented to me or to the board, that it was this dire straits for our students and for our college.
Thank you. Member Costa.
I just kind of want to link back to something else you said, because I'm interested in the budget, and in part it's because I understand what the president is saying. I mean, if you have a rollover budget, to me it is completely, I can't fathom that in the government sector, that you would ever have a rollover budget. And the reason why is because resources are finite and personnel costs, which are upwards of 80% in any government entity, are always increasing. So, the board was really candidly at a disadvantage if they were presented with a rollover budget. And I want to go back to something Michelle said about multi-year budgeting. I don't think I actually knew that it wasn't a requirement. And I'd really like to, through the president, direct our chancellor to pursue multi-year budgeting as a requirement for our districts. In the absence of that, I actually think our governing boards and we, as the ultimate stopgap, are really at a disadvantage. The numbers are the numbers, and I think, as you said, most board members take it at face value. But a year-over-year budget, in light of the enrollment trends we're seeing statewide, in light of the student-centered funding formula, is pretty crazy, for lack of a better term.
If I could respond to that also in something that Trustee Baum said earlier, because I think one of the challenges is that there are several mechanisms in our system that encourage idiosyncratic kind of planning and analysis. And having had a rollover budget for many, many, many years contributes to a culture where people are focused on their individual family instead of the larger family, because they see it as, well, we always get X every year without any without any opportunity for analysis. I don't mean this as a criticism of those individuals, but without any opportunity to look at trends and to see the bigger picture of the college. So what happens is it's not just a fiscal difficulty, it becomes a cultural one, because it's not just this particular issue, but there are a lot of elements of this system that encourage us in many ways, incentivize us to think more idiosyncratically and not collaboratively and with a more community-oriented mindset, whether it has to do with negotiations or shared resources, et cetera. So I really appreciate what you're saying. I think for that reason, that becomes another kind of difficulty in how to get out of, because people are so used to that view. And again, not to blame them. They haven't been invited into seeing that bigger picture through an appropriate budget development process.
Chancellor.
May I add to Dr. Khan's statement? I know that one of the things that in just the couple of weeks that Dr. Khan has been our acting superintendent president is he has really reached out to groups. And I was wondering if you could just speak briefly to how you are engaging all of the constituent groups, and because you could speak more articulately on it, and getting their input on beginning to be collaborative as quickly as possible and trusting one another.
Sure. I mean, as was mentioned, we had already done some really positive things last semester by offering budget workshops and offering a lot of opportunities for folks to get together. But in the last couple of weeks, I've had some separate meetings with our constituent group representatives and some of our administrators, just to have the talk about where we are. We're the leadership in the room. We have to figure out a way to work together, and we have to do some things that are going to be really difficult this year. And so being kind or being collaborative or trying to find the most humanistic way to do it doesn't mean we don't have to do it. We still have to do it. But really emphasizing to our colleagues to talk through how to do that together in the best way we can. And as I said, we had a great start to that last semester, but I do think having some of those just very candid conversations about our roles, our relationships with each other, and what needs to happen has been very helpful. short period of time. We have a long way to go to continue to do that, but I think it's been very helpful.
Vice President Haynes?
So I wasn't going to say anything, but Member Costa and some thinking about what my notes say. It seems to me that community colleges generally, districts generally, are dealing with multiple kinds of issues that all feed into to the challenges that we have, the issue around growth, and having expected that access would solve all problems, and it isn't. And then I'll just speak for my district. We do sort of that analysis ahead of time, and we use a multi-year process. However, when we look at growth, we see growth in online. And while I think that's really, really important, that won't be the panacea either. No. So the issues around, and then as a system, we're looking at pathways, we're looking at the new funding formula and all of those inputs that's changing how our system operates and how to serve students better. And we're challenged that way as well because we've got a number of districts that want to be held harmless. And so while that is important to look at them individually, being held harmless is also not the solution as well. And so from a trustee perspective and serving on a board, part of our solutions really go to looking at our budgets and very realistically and pragmatically looking not just at the current year, but looking beyond that, and then working with our constituency groups to be really, really transparent and honest, that when you look in the mirror, you're actually seeing what you need to see in order to make change. And it's just an observation that I know I'm going to bring back to my district as we talk about this, because we're all susceptible. Every one of us and every district in the state is susceptible, especially given the environment in which we're now operating under. So thank you so much. You've helped to extend the conversation beyond yourselves.
Sure. And in response to that, I'm hearing, guided pathways kinds of language and what you're speaking to. And, we have to radically, in order to meet these budget constraints, we have to radically reform how we do everything at the college, and one of the things that we did last year as part of our guided pathways plan was put together one of our faculty members developed this really nice flyer that has some demographics about who our students are. And what we've been doing in our meetings is just, starting off with, this is, in 2020, these are our students. They're mostly students of color, they're mostly working, they're mostly part-time, and our program was not designed to serve these students many years ago. It doesn't mean that it was bad, it just wasn't designed for this population. So, thinking about things in that way and how then do we reform this whole process is part of the budget issues as well, as we're shifting from access to retention and completion and figuring out what do we have to do differently to meet the needs of those students. And that's going to be significant in this budget discussion as well, although we have immediate things to get to.
Thank you. So the Chancellor gets the last word here.
Thank you, Board President Epstein. Thank you all for the presentation. I just have very quickly sort of next steps, and I need to ask you, Board President Hench, a question. That question is, and I certainly empathize with the challenges you all face. Having spent many, many years at a local district, it is a challenge to make the cuts that you're discussing. It's not in any way going to be easy. You're going to have tremendous political pressure on the board from the various constituent groups that will, in some ways, may be financially harmed by the decisions you're going to make. So my question to you is, do you feel that the board is capable of making those decisions, or do you need a special trustee to help you make those decisions? In other words, do you need the Board of Governors to assign a special trustee to carry you forward?
I would like to believe that our governing board can do the work and is committed to doing the work and doing the best for our college. I think continuous oversight and being able to have open communication here with the Board of Governors and at the Chancellor's office, and perhaps the opportunity to report back to this body in a couple of months with some updates and where we are in the process. And then I would ask you to ask that question of me then. I would like the opportunity to work with the trustees moving into 2020. I have been named governing board president, a vice president and new secretary have also been named to the Palomar College governing board. We have an acting superintendent president who's really digging in and is willing to work collaboratively with everyone. And I would really like the opportunity to work as a team and take it back home and work as a team, but would ask for the opportunity to come back and speak and provide you with updates perhaps in a quarter's time to let, then we would probably have a better feeling for what we would need as a district. And Dr. Khan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would like to understand better. I know that one option was also potentially a fiscal monitor for the district. So I don't know if that's still a possibility, but if that was something that might make sense to the board, of having a fiscal monitor in the meantime, coming back maybe at the end of the semester or whatever is appropriate for the Board of Governors, presenting an update, and then at that time, if it feels like we're really unable or haven't been able to make the progress that we need, we would take the recommendation, obviously, to do what's necessary.
Well, I appreciate your answer, and certainly will recommend that the board not assign a special trustee at this point, and we will assign a fiscal monitor. We will try to contract with an individual as quickly as possible and communicate, make that introduction to you, and expect the fiscal monitor to be able to sit with you to not only monitor, but to be in some of those discussions that you're having and to report back to the board periodically. So we will move forward unless the Board of Governors has any other direction for me. That's the way I would recommend that we move forward.
So this appears to be a real-world example of the civics lesson that Larry Glazer just
You're welcome.
gave us. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, up to the last item, other than board member reports. Update on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan 5.8. Deputy Chancellor Gonzalez.
Now I know how. I'll go ahead.
And John Stanskas.
Yes. Thank you. Now I know how Laura Mattoon feels every time she's last. So we are going to try to do this in under 10 minutes because John's the president of the Academic Senate has to leave for a flight. So in September of 2019, you took action to adopt the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Integration Plan. In your action, you anticipated the release of the 2021 budget, and you required that the Chancellor's office return and give you an update at your January board meeting. The result of that was essentially to look at what a timeline and what the staffing capacity would look like in the 2020 year and our ability to move forward. You heard a little bit about the budget yesterday. You requested $76.1 million as a part of your request. You got $15 million to create a statewide fellowship program, and we are thankful for that appropriation, and we will continue to defend that appropriation throughout the budget process. In the last 3 months since the adoption of this integration plan, we have done the following, and it's also part of the item that was in front of you. We've created an internal implementation team, a team of 8 individuals who are committed, who are a part of different divisions. Without additional appropriation for staff, this work lives within the executive office, and it requires a team that is made up of our general counsel's office, educational services, our IEPI team, and in partnership with the Foundation Success Center. We also continue to engage the legislature. A big part of the work that you want to accomplish and that the system wants to accomplish together is education. So we participated in a select hearing that was designed just specifically for California's community colleges. Both President Stanskas and I were there, and we spoke to the Assembly Higher Ed Committee. We will continue to do that over the next few months, I'm sure. We also participated in more than 6 different conferences, and we have 2 this month alone. John and I have taken turns as the co-chairs of the task force in creating a panel of diverse stakeholders across our state, CEOs, ACPO, HR, as a part of presenting, because we want the system to own this work collectively. It cannot just be this office or the academic senate. Board member Aguinaldo has been a part of those panels, and so we want to thank her for her work in presenting all over the state. We have also created the regulatory structures to continue to move forward with the recommendations that you adopted. So for example, you adopted a new change to the EEO plan that included the way that we apportion those dollars. You already have a statewide EEO and diversity advisory. As a part of that advisory, we created a working group that will present recommendations by May of this year. Yes, that's in the next 4 months, so that they can come forward to you, but first stopping by the Consultation Council. That process is being led by Albert Moore, the Associate Vice Chancellor of Human Resources at West Valley Mission College, and Jacob Knapp, if you recall, he used to work for our General Counsel, and he is at the Los Rios Community College District.
We don't talk about him anymore.
The 2 of them will present to us, along with the committee that has been created, a new model EEO plan for the state that will require us to have a single due date for all districts, as well as require training for all trustees in the state to undergo unconscious bias. That is certainly something that we don't require at the moment. But those are all things that you adopted as a part of the plan. It also will create a new set of funding structures for our multiple methods and the way that we apportion the $50,000 per district. In terms of next steps, I already presented to you that $61.4 million of what you requested are currently unfunded. However, there is a lot of interest, specifically on the Assembly, to fund many of the proposals that you move forward. So we are hopeful, and we remain hopeful. And then the last piece of this is that we continue to really focus on what you adopted, which is what we call Tier 1. If you recall, Tier 1 were the 50 things that we know for a fact that we can accomplish in 1 or 2 years within existing resources. They are things like, yes, the EEO plans, which is work that has already started, additional data collection and putting out guidance to districts, guidance on minimum qualifications, and that's why John joined me up here. He will give you an update on that, and conversations about cultural competency across different statewide associations. Those are just 4 of the things that you adopted out of the 50. We continue to move forward that work, and we will convene the statewide implementation work group that we have created. I gave you an update in the item. And so the first thing that we'll do in March is to disseminate a report that was created that summarizes all of the work that has already been done in the last 9 months, as well as to begin to hand out different items to different associations. So for example, we need our ACRO partners to lead for HR officers in the state. And the integration plan that you adopted identifies them as leaders. And so we would request that they create the appropriate structures within their organizations to lead that work. A big part of the integration plan that you adopted required the Academic Senate to lead. And so I've asked John to give us an update on the work of the Academic Senate and several of the recommendations that were in that plan.
Good afternoon, President Epstein, Vice President Haynes, Chancellor Oakley, and members of the Board of Governors. Hopefully you have a handout that is the recommendations list from the Equity-Driven Systems paper that was unanimously adopted by the delegates at the fall plenary session. The final paper is undergoing the last round of editing, and I will be sure to give you a copy of the entire paper when it's ready. But I wanted to make sure you had this part, which lists out recommendations for the Board of Governors, recommendations for colleges and districts, and specifically calls out on the second page recommendations for local academic senates. So this is the collegial process telling itself what its role is here and how to do that. I think there's something very powerful in that happening unanimously, and I wanted you to have a copy of that. Next week, the Academic Senate is hosting a meeting of various constituent groups and faculty committees that have been assigned to do this work since the beginning of the academic year. I believe you have heard me tell you before that there were certain areas that did fall in the purview of academic and professional matters that the Academic Senate was going to engage in with as many system partners and input as desired. And they include an evaluation of the second minimum qualification and how we use that in hiring processes, and how we can elevate that so that it is of equal value to the other minimum qualification. What a model hiring process might look like and what an appointment process should look like for appointing faculty, that is a function of the Academic Senate, and what could that look like. Tools for colleges, particularly Academic Senate presidents, to engage in a dialogue for systemic change. And so creating tools so that our local Academic Senate presidents have something to work with when they are trying to engage in a faculty-wide and hopefully college-wide dialogue about what does it mean to have bias built into a system, and how can we have a conversation that recognizes the differences in our students and ourselves in a way that is healthy and moves the institution forward. And so that is something that our members have asked for, that we are attempting to create. And then recommendations for the EEO compliance revisions. I will tell you that I told the faculty there to be as strident as they like. There's only 2 faculty on that committee, and I said just sort of like, ring the bell as loud as you'd like on that committee to try to move some of that forward. There is an intersection between compliance and our desire to where we want to go, and there is a line that I think sometimes administrators have to walk that faculty don't. And so I have unleashed them on your committee. I hope that's okay. Just so that you know that we are working with, we have asked for representatives from the league, the CEO group, from ACRO, our human resources specialists, the chief instructional officers, the chief student services officers, and the chancellor's office to participate in this dialogue and in this work together to try to make sure that we are getting all aspects of what needs to happen to create these tools and make these improvements. Is that enough?
Yes. So just to be clear, you, as a part of our update, we don't have any recommendations. The work will really move forward with the statewide implementation work group, which is separate from what President Stanskis has just mentioned. We are encouraging each of the associations to create structures and partnerships with other organizations across the state to accomplish the work that they need to lead. What you do see on your update is that your next update is scheduled for September 2020, and we have scheduled throughout 2022. We would like for this working group to have a 2-year process, right? So we've identified 50 things that we can accomplish in 1 or 2 years. We're sticking to that, and that's a part of evaluating whether the structure is actually working, and just continuously coming to all of you with additional recommendations that we may have or challenges. So the next time you'll hear about this will be in September of 2020.
Unless I bring it up first.
That's true.
Member Aguinaldo.
Just a quick comment, because I don't know how much of the 10 minutes you guys took. I want to thank and acknowledge you for being the only team that I know of offhand who can really squeeze water out of rocks. I'm very optimistic about the work that all of the task force and the many work groups are doing in this respect, and I think it's because the people who are so desperate to squeeze the water out of rocks are actually squeezing pretty darn hard. So thank you very much for that, and I look forward to continuing to be engaged with your team. I was instructed yesterday to be tempered in my disappointment over the budget. I would like to continue vigilance in requesting for the funds that we have sought for. I think the $1 million in one-time funds to modernize the registry is actually exceedingly important, and as is the funds to provide some staff here in the Chancellor's office to make sure that these efforts are ongoing. The dollar figures that we're talking about in general are relatively small, right? The registry is a powerful team of, I think, 4. The EO funds distributed to each district is in the 5-figure range. These are very small lifts that I'm hoping we can make very powerful changes with. So thank you in advance for your work, and I look forward to your continued update.
Okay, thanks. I'm very impressed with the discipline and diligence and conscientiousness that you're following through on this, and that's great. So may luck be with you. Okay, standing between our lunch. I'm sorry.
And board member
my vice
reports.
president wasn't here to remind me. Sorry. It is certainly okay. Sorry about that.
FAC flew me up here to make comments on 2 items, and so I'm going to get my second one in. Adam Wetzman, past president of FAC from Rio Hondo College. I'd like to say that FAC would like to commend the Board of Governors for its support for this plan. This is obviously very, very important, and FAC is going to make the components of this plan part of its budget advocacy, because we believe, certainly, that we need more diversity in the community college faculty corps. Certainly, the latest budget does not have all the components of it, but it does have some of the components of it. For example, there is that fellowship program for $15 million. This is actually something that, similar to something that FAC had proposed a few years ago for kind of like a pathway to community college teaching for the budget change proposal. So this is a good first step. We hope that the Board of Governors and the Chancellor's Office continues to support efforts to increase the number of full-time hires, as I think it was Board Member Shaw who said you don't fire your way to diversity, you hire your way to diversity. So we need to have more and more full-time faculty, and we need to provide support for the part-time faculty as well across the system. For example, in the latest budget round, there's $10 million for one-time funding for part-time office hours, but the way that the system is set up, that really is not going to increase that many districts that have office hours, if at all. For example, in my district, we do not have paid office hours for part-time faculty, which means that when a student walks into the classroom on day 1, that he or she has about a 50% chance of having a professor that will be paid to have office hours outside of the actual classroom time. And I know you talk about local control, but sometimes local control doesn't necessarily lead to the kinds of outcomes we want for the faculty. Nonetheless, FAC does support the efforts that have been made by the Chancellor's Office, by the Board of Governors in this area, and we look forward to working with you and hopefully getting these positive results in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, now I can say this. The only thing standing between us and lunch is board member comments. So
When's dinner?
So the floor is open for board member comments. Member Perigo.
Thank you. I just wanted to start my comments today with compliments to the Chancellor and to the Chancellor's office, because I'm really heartened to hear at this meeting the number of people, and I know specifically when we looked at the unlawful discrimination regulations as well as the ESL regulations, the number of people who came forward and said, thank you for listening, thank you for incorporating our thoughts into the final product. It was very helpful for me to see, even in our materials, the amount of voices that came forward and sort of responses to those voices so that we could kind of track what was going on. So I just wanted to start today with compliments to the Chancellor and your office for, just for that transparency and letting us hear how that sort of transpired. So thank you for that. I also wanted to just briefly touch on a visit that Member Aguinaldo and Rawlings came down to the San Diego area. We visited the SEDICA meeting, which is a consortium of presidents from the San Diego and Imperial Valley colleges. So it includes Palomar, Miracosta, Mesa, Miramar, City College, Grossmont, Cuyamaca, Southwestern College, Imperial Valley College, and it also has representatives from San Diego State, UCSD, and Cal State San Marcos. So they were kind enough to let us crash their meeting for about an hour, and we got sort of the big picture of this, what's going on in the San Diego and Imperial Valley region. And just to share with you a couple of things that they shared with us at the meeting, they really expressed a lot of positive feelings about the Strong Workforce Initiative, and we're really grateful for that funding and for the way that it was set up to be a consortium so that we would work with collectively in our regions. And they really have a desire to not only secure the existing baccalaureate degrees, but to expand it. So that was also something that they expressed. Some things that they told us that they were struggling with, and this is no surprise because I know I've brought it up at this table many times before, but regional transfer is a huge problem in San Diego and Imperial County, and we know that half of our students did not make it into our local transfer institutions, and this is obviously a concern because it can be compounded by the student center funding formula if we're having local transfer issues. So just want to re-highlight that as some of their concerns. We then went to Mesa. We had lunch with a dean and coordinator of our baccalaureate program because that's something Member Aguinaldo wanted to learn more about, and also President Lester had lunch with us. Then we met with Constance Carroll for an hour, and she also shared her desire to make existing baccalaureate programs permanent and supports for expansion. She expressed the desire to have time to really look at the initiatives we've been working on and figure out if what's working for us and what's not. So really like doing a dig into equity funding, and even if we go back to kind of the student initiatives where we were looking at ed plans and things like that, and sort of how has that impacted our students, and what areas should we be investing more time in. So she really wanted us to know about her desire to kind of take a breather on initiatives and kind of figure out what we're looking at, and then to have more data to look for solutions for our problems. So I know that there's one researcher in this office or whatever it is, but really how important those data marts are to the work that we do, and how we would love to see expansion of that so that we can be making more data-informed decisions. And we also talked about some of the struggles that we have because the system isn't really designed for the students we're serving. And so I know I don't want to belabor it because I know we've talked a lot about it already, but even something as simple as knowing that tutoring makes a big difference for students and not really having appropriate funding to do tutoring, just the mechanisms in which we have to kind of operate make those things challenging. So she kind of expressed to us her hope that we could continue to do advocacy to consider how we fund things. And then the last thing she brought up, which I thought was worth sharing, was asking that maybe we consider a way to do an assessment on the ADTs and figure out where they are and are not working and what we need to do to solve those problems. Again, nothing new to you because I brought it to this board before. For some of our disciplines, this really has shut down transfer for them. And I think that, as much as we can look into what's not working and try to solve internally what those internal barriers have become would be great for our students. I also wanted to quickly thank the league. I took a lot away from the CCLC conference, and I really enjoyed it, and a lot of the keynote speakers. I very much enjoyed Chancellor Oakley's keynote speech with the students, as well as the presentation on the future of leadership in an exponential world. That was a fantastic, by the Harvard professor, was a fantastic presentation. I also stepped in on the Student-Centered Funding Formula Oversight Committee that met at San Diego City College recently. Landia Jose stopped by and spoke about the governor's priorities. And one thing I wrote down that she said that I liked was she said, we need to make sure that our institutions are well positioned to meet the needs of California students. And I think that nobody at this board would disagree with that. And I don't think anybody at this board would disagree with the idea that we're underfunded as a system, just inherently. So with that, I heard a narrative that really bothered me, and I wanted to just express it here. So there was this narrative amongst people on the board, and they were mostly from external groups, who basically said, well, the privileged colleges are just going to have to get over it and understand that we need to start moving money around to deal with the haves and have-nots kind of scenario. And I think that's a problematic line of narrative. I don't think there are privileged colleges. I don't think there are haves in our system. I'm not making an argument at all for status quo in funding, but what I'm saying is that as we change funding, it's going to be difficult for people, and we need to be sensitive that it's not a bunch of privileged people sitting around on their bloated budgets not wanting to give any of it up. And so I just wanted to kind of disparage that line of narrative because I think it's insensitive and I think it's wrong. It's just inherently mischaracterizes what colleges are dealing with. So I just wanted to put that out on the table. And then the last two quick things was I wanted to plug the facts current edition of their little journal newsletter. For one, our member Zaragoza has a very great article in there that I would encourage everybody to read. But the other thing that I really loved about this particular edition was there's a group of professors speaking about AB 705 implementation, both pros and cons, things that are really going great and things they're struggling with. And it gives a nice perspective, I think, cross-cut perspective of sort of some of the things that people are seeing. And so if you want to know a little bit more about the day-to-day, what's happening with that, I really recommend the article. I think it's very balanced and it's very well done. And then the very last thing I wanted to say, and I know Darius is not here, but I think he deserves public comment from me. So in the fall, I spent a tremendous amount of time working with my students on where they want to transfer and what kind of jobs they want to do and those types of things. And one of my students happens to have some interest in areas that overlapped with Member Rawlings' work. So I reached out to him and asked him if he would set aside some time to talk to my student, and did. It made a big impact on my student. And I know for him that probably wasn't a big deal, but it is a big deal, and I really appreciated that he took the time to do that. And so even though he's not here, I just wanted to publicly recognize that. And that's all from me. Thanks.
Yes, Member Fitzgerald.
So I just wanted to update the board and everybody on a couple things upcoming, specifically some student-focused events. So it was mentioned in, I think, the board meeting yesterday, the SSCCC, the Student Center for California Community Colleges, has an upcoming March in March event, an advocacy event on March 19th at 11 a.m. So if you can join us, that's going to be fantastic. The SSCCC Board of Directors meeting in January is going to be January 18th at 9 a.m. And most importantly, the General Assembly, which is where students from across the state gather and pass resolutions that set the priority of all 2.1 million students in our system, the legislative priorities, is going to be April 3rd through the 5th. And there was an email sent out by the executive team of the SSCCC with an active resolutions packet. So if there's students that are interested in writing resolutions, they can review the active resolutions packet, which basically shows resolutions that were passed in prior years that have not been implemented so that they don't write duplicative resolutions. And January 29th, 2020 is the deadline for submitting resolutions. Any student can submit a resolution from any college to advocate on behalf of a particular issue. And then for students that don't necessarily know what resolutions are or how to write them, the SSCCC has done something that's pretty remarkable. They've done kind of webinars that are going to be hosted. There's going to be one on January 26th from 6 to 8 p.m. And you can follow, you can go on the SSCCC's website, Student Senate, ccc.org or something like that, to follow information about the webinars. But there's going to be one about debating the resolution packet that is accepted, and another one on how to be an effective delegate, meaning how you can defend your resolution at General Assembly. So really looking forward to that. General Assembly is probably the most important event for our students in terms of legislative advocacy and deciding what we advocate for. And then I just wanted to mention briefly that I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of the SB 291 and AB 1314 work group. Basic needs is probably the biggest issue facing our students. It definitely is in Stockton, in the Central Valley, and San Joaquin Delta College. Food insecurity and housing insecurity is more rampant and scary than we could ever imagine. And we can't possibly expect our students to succeed without basic need reform. So, and this falls in with financial aid reform. So I'm keeping a close eye on that. I know Member Zaragoza is working on that group, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that and hoping for the best. And along with that, there's a California Higher Education Basic Needs Alliance, CHEBNA, Intersegmental Basic Needs Summit on February 6th and the 7th. I'll be attending that, and I encourage my fellow board members to do some research and attend that if possible. Like I said, basic needs is the biggest issue facing our students, so anything that we can learn to combat this issue and fight for our students is essential.
Thank you. Member Baum.
Thank you, President Epstein. I'm taking this privilege because this is the last meeting in my current term on the Board of Governors, and I wanted to acknowledge that I've served on a number of local boards and the state board, and this is by far and away the most important and the most effective board that I've been involved with, and how much I've appreciated that. I have a deep commitment to the mission of this body and this system. I don't share this very frequently, but my mom was a high school dropout, and she was married and divorced at 18, and then was married and divorced with 2 kids at 28, and then married again at 29, and she's still married to that person who happens to be my dad. But my dad is a refugee. He fled, and the rest of it, a war, and the rest of his family was wiped out, and he came to this country. And I know a number of our students are refugees. A number of our students are high school dropouts or single parents, and that really motivates my involvement, my advocacy for this system. And one of the things that's bothered me the most recently is how we as a nation have misserved our young people. I recently went back to where my father was born and was talking to some students there. They're able to get an education without debt. They're able to access health care in a quality system. They're able to find housing in affordable rates. We have put so many obstacles as a nation in front of our young people that it's not a conservative or a liberal thing. We are actually handicapping and threatening the future of this nation by handcuffing and putting chains around the ankles of this coming generation. And so, and this board and this system is one of those stops in that to interrupt that cycle. We provide access to education at little or no cost. And that's something that we need to continue to fight and preserve, because with all these forces working against young people, this is one of the systems and one of the places that's actually trying to make life better, and it's just not to help young people, it's to help our entire country and our entire state. And I'm hoping that that work will continue, and I know it will continue with the leadership of this board and the leadership of this chancellor and the commitment of this state. So it's been a privilege serving. I don't know what the future holds, but this is the last meeting of my current term, and I wanted to take that opportunity to say something in case this is the final meeting that I have.
Thank you. That's great.
4 more years.
Yeah, 6 more years. Everybody. Thank you, Member Baum. I guess I was going to say you almost sounded like a Democrat there, but but I know you wouldn't appreciate it. So anyhow, with that, I'm
I'm the last person.
It's hard to top that.
It is, and so my first is to thank Member Baum for serving on this particular board. His deep understanding as a trustee and his own personal experiences has helped to inform all of us. So I wanted to start off that way. My report is just very quickly. We had 2, and it's about our agenda. We had 2 first readings that I think are really critical to the work that we do. One of them was on the auxiliary reimbursement regulations, where it can really make a difference for students. That money can shift to, where possible, can shift to making certain that students get help to get what they need. The second one was AB 705 ESL, I did get lobbied on this particular issue. As you could tell yesterday, most of the folks who were speaking on that issue were out of my district, and they had some deep concerns where they shared things with me. And my advice was to hold off and to allow the committee, the organizing committee that sort of worked on the ESL regulations, to do their work. And so I want to commend them because I thought that they did their work well, and so did the ESL faculty who came yesterday, because there was great anxiety about what was going to come about. Again, those particular regulations will move forward for students with a second language that will help them. A barrier will drop and will help them get to their particular goals. And then there are three other areas that I want to commend staff on, and that is on the district fiscal health monitoring. I want to thank the chancellor and the chancellor's office because they've kept us informed about what we need to be doing as a system that has to get pushed down relative to districts and colleges. I want to thank Palomar, they were courageous, and they are gung-ho about making changes. And then finally, I really appreciated the spotlight on technology and the investments. It helps me go back to my own district and sort of ask some questions, and helps me formulate what those questions should look like. And then finally, on the diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, this too will elevate what we need in terms of cultural competency and growing our own relative to what the system needs to look like and be like, to make really big changes. And again, I always look through the lens of what benefits our students. And so that this too will benefit our students, that they will see folks that look like them, that had a pathway. And it's not that our faculty and others are not doing a fabulous work. They indeed are. They've taken up the mantle and they're working very, very hard. So I want to recognize that piece and want to thank everyone for the hard work.
Thank you. Member Zaragoza.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to try to make this short. So I mainly want to talk about, so at CCLC, I got to do a presentation, and it was a very interesting presentation that really opened my eyes. So I think it was very productive, but it also kind of showed me how far we have to work. And I know Bill was actually at that presentation. I think it opened his eyes a little bit too, seeing the kind of reality that we face every day. So to give you a rundown, I was just talking about giving students a, not a voting right, but just the advisory vote, which is basically just as if I were to say, hey, I really recommend this to all of you. And that in itself was a debate among trustees and CEOs. And so, us as students, we've been talking about getting full vote for a long time. And, just getting an advisory vote is kind of controversial in that world to a lot of people. And so, I really just, when we're talking about all of this, and we're going to be working with Larry and the league and, really trying to come up with something together that we can put through, that all of us can support together. But when we're talking about this in the upcoming year, I just want all of you to imagine if both Colm and I were in the audience, had to, tap on the mic or come up here and say, hey, I want to say something, come up there, say our comments if we want to, and didn't even have an advisory vote. We just let all of you vote. We don't really get an opinion on it. And that's how a lot of our districts are run, or how they would rather be run. And how much you would lose from those conversations is not having any student to speak up on that, or having them go through a process to try to speak up on it. And, just how hard it is for us on a local level, because all of you here, you all value us and, have us speak up here. And sadly, it's not the case for all of our districts and, going down to any of those kind of meetings. And so, but I think that it was a very productive conversation because we really got to engage on the same level. And I think that we need more of those conversations because without it, we kind of live in two separate worlds. And so we're going to be working on that next year, but it was a very interesting time. And then as for Cal Grant, I really am happy with the Student Aid Commission because not only are we having these meetings for Cal Grant and which would be the two bills combining, they're also having separate phone calls with just all the students and just talking to us specifically without all the other people in the room and saying, hey, how do you feel about this, right? And making sure that we really get to say what we want to. And so we have one of those phone calls scheduled later this week. And then in 2 weeks or so is when we have our next full meeting. And I think that's when we're going to decide what's going to happen with this bill. And so I'm just really appreciative of that. And not only that, but also them inviting in students from the nonprofit side of things, right, for all of those schools. And then I am also going to be soon speaking at on a FAC panel, which is going to be really great at American River College later this week on AB 705. So we're going to have a very interesting conversation there about all of its intricacies. And then I'm also honored to be able to soon speak at Pasadena City College, and it's going to be for building support for Native American students. So if any of you are down south, I need to get the date. I'll send out the date. I would be really appreciative if all of you could, attempt to attend if you're down there. But I know it's going to be a really great event. We don't usually have that kind of support, so it's going to be really great. And then, yep, that's it. So, thank you.
That's it? All right.
Member Baum, if this is, excuse me, indeed your last meeting, thanks for your service, and I offer you a round of applause. Thank you.
Hopefully you'll be back. Okay, on that, we're going to adjourn.